We have to make the choice to slow down enough to think about what you do today will affect tomorrow.
You're listening to We Are the Great Turning, a podcast with me, Jess Sarante, and my friend and mentor, Joanna Macy, about living through these wild times with our hearts intact. You may remember that we began this series by talking about the 3 stories of our time, and Joanna and I invited you to join us in what we call the Great Turning. In the Work That Reconnects, the spiral helps us to find the strength to continue showing up for the daily work of building a more just and life-sustaining world. So we started with gratitude, and after honoring our pain, we're now emerging into the 3rd phase of the spiral that's called seeing with new eyes. This is what this and the next episode will be about. I often think of seeing with new eyes as the part of the spiral where the fog of our pain begins to lift off. And what comes in its place is a feeling of greater connection and belonging. It's as if we'd been looking out at the world through one narrow lens, and then the aperture widens to let in a bigger picture. If you've been listening to this whole series, by now you might know what I'm talking about. You might remember hearing a transformation like this in episode 3, which began with Joanna saying that she worried we had no better fate than the captain of a sinking ship, but then shifted into gratitude and awe.
I'm really happy. I actually am. Because I've been saying things that are so real for me. The Great Turning does that.
Yeah, it does. Every time we sit down with these microphones, the conversation does not turn in the way that we think it would.
No. And the Great Turning is like that. We can't really have an idea of what's going to occur to us to do and of what we can do together. And even do when we're not together.
Mm-hmm. Seeing with new eyes is about cultivating a wider sense of self. We shift from seeing ourselves as lonely individuals moving through a chaotic and competitive world to knowing that we are interdependent, living in symbiosis with the great web of life. In my experience, there's a huge difference between thinking about my interconnection with the world and feeling it, letting that truth sink into my body. I hope you'll let that truth sink into your body as you listen to this episode. So before we go any further, I want to invite you to slow down with me for just a minute. If you can, put down whatever's in your hands, close your eyes, and take a deep breath. Now, think about your ancestors. I invite you to picture your parents standing behind you. Then imagine their parents, your grandparents, standing behind them. Then your great-grandparents behind them. Now, watch this family tree continue to grow. By the time you get back 7 generations, there are over 200 people standing behind you. And by the time you go back 10 generations, there are over 2,000. There are 400 generations of humanity lined up behind you, going back to the dawn of civilization. And of course, more beyond that. These people made your life possible. You could not exist without them. But your ancestors are not just the humans who came before you. All entities on this planet, from rocks to bacteria to flora and fauna, have interacted through complex feedback systems over 4.5 billion years to make our planet what it is today. We could say that every being on this planet, every single one that has ever existed, has conspired together to make life as we know it possible. Sit with this for a moment. Your existence is inextricably linked to all of the life that came before you. And now that you're alive, you are a part of that same process that created you. So now I invite you to imagine your children, or simply a child you love. See them standing in front of you. Then see their children and grandchildren in front of them. Allow that line of future beings to extend out 7 generations in front of you and then beyond. We are the inflection point between all that has ever been and all that will be. Our world was created by this extraordinary and ancient web of ancestors, and now it's our turn to shape the future for the ones who will come next. Shifting into this broader awareness is something that Joanna calls deep time thinking. Joanna started thinking about deep time in 1976 when her son Jack came home from college and handed her a paper he'd written about thermal pollution from nuclear reactors. Learning about how toxic nuclear contamination would harm the land and the lives of people hundreds of years into the future had a huge impact on Joanna, and it changed the way she thought about time.
Yeah, it started for me in working around nuclear waste. I realized what it does to the future and to the beings of the future.
Mm-hmm.
So it helps us really see the dimensions of our impact and the choices we make. Often under pressure, we have to make the choice to slow down enough to think about what you do today will affect tomorrow.
Joanna joined a group of local anti-nuclear activists in D.C. For decades, she participated in what she calls nuclear guardianship, a creative protest movement that drew in part on the legacy of Quaker nonviolent resistance.
We wanted to be guardians for the future beings in our care for radioactive materials.
Listening to Joanna speak about her days holding demonstrations at power plants and weapons facilities is striking to me because of how similar it feels to what the climate movement is trying to wake people up to today. Joanna saw how we're putting the burden of nuclear waste on future generations, people who will have no choice but to live with the toxicity we leave behind. And with nuclear weapons, how we might destroy the conditions for life altogether. It's the same situation with burning fossil fuels. Our daily decisions pose an existential threat to future generations. One day, I asked Joanna to tell me why this concept of deep time is so important. What do you want me and the people who are making this for to know about deep time? Like, why is it important for us as we move into the future?
So what do we mean by deep time? It's not the time that gets reported on in the papers. And particularly as we're in a hurry, it's worth noting that the speeding up of time in the industrial era, but this speeding up of time affects every single one of us who is living an urban life or hooked into world events. So we tend to be in a hurry, and deep time tends to considerations, that is, the effects of what we're doing on life through time in the future. So that means that we're like, in some ways, a bus driver who doesn't have time to lift his eyes from the map.
So what would it feel like to pick up our gaze and look out at the horizon? Some folks have begun calling this phase of the spiral seeing with new and ancient eyes, because our fresh perspective connects us to the kind of wisdom our ancestors may have carried. So, for example, we might begin to see with more clarity the violence of business as usual. Its forced urgency coerces us into treating people, other living things, and material objects as disposable.
So all of this takes a certain quality. It takes a commitment to be curious about the effects of what you're doing.
Business as usual lulls us into accepting the unacceptable. By slowing down, we can resensitize ourselves and reawaken compassion in order to resist these horrors that we've gotten used to. And this connects to honoring our pain for the world, because when we allow our hearts to break open, we're also allowing ourselves to feel what the business as usual paradigm is really costing us all.
We've been taught to compete. We've been taught to push other people under the bus. We've been taught to identify with this little bag of flesh that we are. We're taught that our comfort and our bank account are the most important thing. What this has done to the psyche of human beings, and what it's done to the flame of life, to help us see each other as competitors, which capitalism does, is one of the most cruel things to ever have been done to humans. And we've done a lot of cruel things to each other in wars, in campaigns of the empires, in slavery. Oh my God.
So the business as usual mindset has brilliantly and violently convinced many of us that we are separate from each other. It's because of this competition that we think we can't afford to slow down. But we're moving so fast that we can barely register how our ways of life are harming us today, hurting others less fortunate, and hurtling us collectively toward an ever more precarious future. All of this is why in the Work That Reconnects, we practice thinking in terms of deep time. In Joanna's nuclear guardianship circles, she and her fellow activists knew they needed to find a way to slow down, to feel how devastating today's nuclear waste would be for the lives of future beings.
We would pretend, what is it like to be a human at that time in 100 years or 1,000 years with all this radioactive waste? We did a lot of role-playing to make the future beings real to us. But what we found is that when we imagined ourselves as the future ones, it gave us enormous motivation and a kind of inspiration. It made sense. And it also made us feel we have not just moral duty, it generated a kind of caring. It really began to matter to us.
Joanna and her friends were discovering the power of imagination.
So maybe the kind of work we need to do is for us to assume a connection and speak to it and ask it to speak. And it's almost as if the future ones are waiting to that invitation, and it pours in.
When we practice the Work That Reconnects, we'll often find our new eyes by role-playing. We might speak for a non-human being, like a tree or a salmon. We might speak as the voice of doubt inside someone's head, or as someone we see as our opponent. And sometimes we change perspectives by playing with deep time. We speak as ancestors and as the people Joanna calls future beings. Joanna found that at first it might feel like a leap to speak as a future being. But when we take that imaginative step,
there is something that happens that may be even not all that conscious of being willing to speak for the flow of life. It's not a logical process. Nor do you say, do I have the right? Or do I have the knowledge? Don't ask me to speak for my great-grandchildren. That disappears, that kind of pretending that you're not connected. When they talk for the future, they don't say, oh, I just was making that up. There's something that has gripped them.
Pretending to time travel as a way of strengthening our activism? It might seem a bit strange at first, but in this moment, when our destructive culture is driving us toward apocalypse, this kind of play just might be essential. Because if we can find a way to really let in the full extent of the harm we're causing, we might also find the collective motivation to turn things around.
Our culture needs that.
One of my favorite Work That Reconnects exercises is called the 7th generation. And in it, participants imagine that they've traveled to a place outside of time where they can meet with beings who live 200 years from now, 7 generations in the future. And these future beings live in a world that is healthier than ours. They live in life-sustaining community together. They've benefited from all the work we did in service of the Great Turning. They want to know how we found the strength to do what we did and give us their love and their gratitude for all that we did for them. Every time I do this exercise, whether I'm playing myself or the future being, I walk away with a deeper sense of my place in the lineage of human history. I leave with a deeper love and commitment to do all that I can to make this world beautiful for the people of the future.
We are part of a river of time from before we were conceived in this life. There are those living in us somehow, through us somehow. We're connected through tears and grief as well as love. We're connected through loss as well as birth.
This knowledge is alive within us.
First of all, we know in our bodies that we were born of humans and are going to die. And then that we know we're of a human chain, a chain of births and deaths that link us to the future. That there are going to be the children of our siblings or cousins, if not from ourselves, who will carry our humanity into the future. We're one river.
So what might start as a simple role play becomes a way to tap into a wisdom that is not pretend at all. As long as we're sincerely willing to try on a new perspective, we're all capable of tapping into this wisdom, no matter our age or our life experience. As Joanna explained to me one day,
I came on it not to amuse myself, but because I wanted to know how in the world can we affect the spilling of radioactive waste that has mattered hugely to me. And it allowed me to see things and accept things that would seem academic otherwise.
But you just said something that I think is really important for my own understanding of this, which is it is easy to want to intellectualize the crises that we're in, to keep a nice, safe, psychological distance through the written word, through books, through intellectual conversation. And that has its place. And there's something deeper that we need. or that can resource us more deeply than just intellectualizing it.
And that is precisely what I found. Because when you speak for a future being, you're different afterwards. And you can go and take a whole course on radioactivity and time and not have it touch the core of your heart, which is motivation. And then they find, oh, this has touched some feeling of connection in me. This is as real as I am. And the moral imagination is huge.
Mm-hmm.
And the moral imagination springs from the web of interconnectivity. Mm-hmm. It's not just something that we invent.
By imagining a connection, we create one.
Well, this is this shift into feeling the future beings are in us in some way. Now, I know that sounds odd, but this is what I personally felt.
Mm-hmm. I don't think it's odd.
And then speaking for them kicks that door open. And you find that there's a passion which I can hear in my own voice now.
So even when we can't see or even feel our connection to the world, it's still there. And the more we practice engaging our moral imagination and connecting to the world, the more we learn to trust in that connection.
We need trust like we need oxygen. So you can build trust in each other, and we can build trust in life itself.
I've come to see rediscovering the truth of my connection to the world as a practice. Like that bus driver, I have to keep picking my head up from the business as usual map and gaze out at the beautiful landscape that I'm a part of. Because I've been steeped in business as usual's myth of individualism and isolation for my whole life, I've had to work to learn how to see and feel that connection. Now I want to bring you back to Joanna's table for a moment when she helped me feel the truth of my inner connection with the world at another level. If I can attempt to articulate the thing that I'm learning from you right now. I feel you poking at the illusion of separation that is like a veil that our culture pulls over each of our eyes. That we move through the world, or that we are trained in our culture to move through the world believing ourselves separate entities, not just from one another, but also separate from the ancestors and separate from the ones who are to come. And part of what I just got in what you were saying is sort of like snap out of it. Like all we need to do is to dare to feel that connection. Even if our cultural training tells us that we're being silly or childish or whatever, making stuff up, delusional, woo-woo. Yeah, right? That like it is so true to who we are, that connection, that all we need to do is to dare to speak into it. It's like plugging in, to like plug into that ancient renewable resource of our interconnection. And here we are like walking around trying to act on behalf of our planet unplugged.
And actually, the work you and I do serves as a plug. It's beautiful. This is so helpful. I think it's because most everything we do in education to the little kid going into first grade is unplugs. I love the metaphor plugged in because there is a neural network of our planet. If there's life on our planet, it is a life that feeds itself through interconnectivity. And that we're in a scary time with the industrial growth society. It functions best when we think we can make money off each other. And that means taking more than we give. And that's poisonous to life, to take more than you give. And so, to talk about plugging in, it's plugging into the life that our planet needs, the life that feeds us, the life that moves our breath, that digests our food, that motivates the most beautiful art and political courage, and we're always able to come home again. We are restoring a sense to the future by asking ourselves to speak for it. And our culture is acting as if it's suffering from a profound sense of dislocation from humanity through time. But if we were to regain that, there's nothing that a human and humans together can do. So what you speak for, you identify with. You care for. You take action for.
The thing that heartens me that I've learned from you in this work is that while disconnection is painful, deeply painful, I don't need to be so afraid of that disconnection, because the reality of our interconnection is so true and so alive under the surface of my awareness, under the surface of the illusion that I walk around the world with of disconnection, that all it takes is finding a path to plug in, and boom, the lights are on and everything's moving and buzzing, and my life is full and my existence has meaning. And it's just like, it's like if you're stumbling around in a dark room trying to plug a lamp in, it's like, okay, it's not, damn it, I can't get it in, right? But it's there. The live wire, the electricity is right there. And this is, I think, the power of the work that reconnects, is that you've provided instructions to plug in, guidance, how to turn the lights back on.
Yes.
Just as it is with nearly everything else we learn in the spiral, turning the lights back on is a daily practice. In our next episode, episode 8, we're going to continue to explore seeing with new and ancient eyes. This episode, we went backward and forward in time to see ourselves in the context of our human and planetary lineage. And next episode, we'll apply a different lens on time and look at the power of total awareness to the present moment, and the ways that the reality of death can wake us up to the only time we have, now. We'll do this through the lens of Eros and Thanatos, love and death.
And good sex was often called the little death.
Right.
And there's something about it that the closest thing is dying. Well, hey folks, anybody read any environmental reports recently? So if we can't save our world, we have to love it.
Thanks for listening to We Are the Great Turning. This show is free for everyone, made possible by our generous donors. If you'd like to, you can make a donation at wearethegreatturning.com. There, you can also find our toolkit with discussion prompts, guided exercises, and more to bring the insights from this podcast deeper into your life. We build the Great Turning by talking and acting together. So please consider sharing these episodes with someone you love, or forming a podcast club and going through the exercises in the toolkit together. This episode, we have a bonus for you. It's a guided exercise designed to help you practice the work that reconnects with the people in your life. You can find the link to that bonus episode in your podcast app. We'd love your feedback, so send us a note or a voice message at greatturning@soundstrue.com. You can find me on Instagram at Jess_Serrante, SERRANTE, and at JessSerrante.com. This show is brought to you by the Sounds True Foundation. Thank you to our team at Sounds True, especially Tammy Simon and Fernie Tiflis. Our show's producer is Anya Kamenetz. Our audio producer and engineer is Luce Fleming. Our editorial consultant is Anna Sale. Thank you to Rising Appalachia for the use of their songs Resilient, Catalyst, and Novels of Acquaintance. Thank you to all of our generous donors who made this podcast possible. Christopher Hormel, the Best Family Foundation, the Calliopeia Foundation, Barbara Ford, Polly Howells, Linnea Lombard, Kathleen Sullivan, Blaise Dupuis, Miju Han, Gideon Wald, and everyone who contributed to our GoFundMe. Special thanks to Ann Simons-Bucher, Peggy Macy, Stephanie Kaza, Jeremy Blanchard, Lucy Boucher, Jesse Marshall, Seth Bush, and Frida Nixdorf. I want to offer my deepest gratitude to Joanna Macy for her profound friendship and extraordinary generosity and wisdom. It has been the honor of my life to make this podcast with you.
It's a new kind of birth.
Yeah.
We're opening to a different kind of revelation.
Yeah.